When Soviet General Anatoly Cherdenko ordered Gregor Zelinsky to use his time machine to travel back to the past to eliminate Albert Einstein, he did so in the hopes that this would deprive their greatest nemesis, the Allies, with the advanced technology they used to defeat the Soviet Union in previous conflicts. While Cherdenko succeeded in getting rid of Einstein, the Allies weren't as technologically deprived as he had thought they'd be. This was thanks to an Amsterdam-based military defense firm called FutureTech, who supplied the Allies with many of their modern weapon systems. From chronospheres to teleport divisions in space-time, to Harbinger gunships raining down death and destruction upon enemies below. Some of FutureTech's most chilling weapon systems were those that put enemy forces on ice, not figuratively, but literally. These cryo weapons were deployed through various means on the battlefield, including from the Allies' space-based weapon systems. The Allies' orbital network included satellites that were armed with a cryo beam. Once positioned over a target, and then activated, the satellite sends down a beam which draws all heat out of the designated area. At the same time, the area is sprayed with pure water and a burst of liquid helium, causing a flash freeze that causes any units in the area to be encased in a block of solid ice. This Cryoshot, as it was called, could freeze both infantry, armored vehicles, and naval vessels, though it would have no effect on aircraft. More powerful versions of the Cryoshot could be deployed as well, these being known as the Cryoblast and the Crogeddon, the latter of which was the strongest. Not only could the Cryoblast and Crogeddon affect units within a larger surface area, their beams could even freeze entire structures. Additionally, the affected forces would take longer to thaw out. Frozen targets were effectively thrust into a state of suspended animation. The effects of the freezing gradually wear off, and the targets snap out of the effect all at once, with no recollection of the passage of time, as though waking from slumber. This is, of course, assuming that the frozen units were allowed to awaken from their frozen prisons. While suspended in this state, the units and/or structures are extremely brittle, so much so that a basic concussive impact could cause them fatal damage, something that Allied commanders were quite keen on exploiting. Since frozen targets were defenseless, that was often the best time to eliminate them. This was especially true for structures, as the destruction of such buildings, especially production and economic ones, was pivotal in deciding a battle. The Soviets' primary counter to all cryo-weapon systems was the Iron Curtain. Not only could it protect vehicles and structures from being frozen, it could also instantly unfreeze already frozen units. However, the Iron Curtain was expensive to attain and field, so its protective capabilities were limited. As this alternate Third World War progressed, FutureTech continued to make improvements to their cryo-weapons. The company managed to further downsize the technology, which resulted in a couple of cryo-based units that would make their way into the Allied arsenal. The first of these units was the Cryocopter.
Let's run some field tests.
When a radical Dutch energy absorption system was coupled with a British helicopter chassis, the one-of-a-kind Cryocopter was born. The Cryocopter was so one-of-a-kind, in fact, that it recently went into mass production. Though classified as a support aircraft, unsuited for conventional anti-surface combat, and lacking in any weapons in the traditional sense, it is nonetheless gaining remarkable popularity among Allied forces for its ability to neutralize enemy targets in a relatively civil, if unorthodox way. The Cryocopter is stable and dependable as helicopters go. An ancillary benefit of its sophisticated onboard systems is a surprisingly strong fuselage, proven to be able to withstand direct fire. The Cryocopter's durability wasn't what made it so impressive. That credit goes to its custom cryobeam, which, when focused on a single target, would freeze it in place. Infantry units were almost instantly frozen by the beam, while armored units and vessels would take several seconds to be frozen. The same can be said for base structures. Once they are, however, they can then be quickly destroyed by Allied combat units. Additionally, the more cryocopters that are focused on freezing the same target, the quicker that target will become frozen.
He needs to chill.
The cryobeam wasn't the Cryocopter's only weapon, however. As if the cryobeam is not remarkable enough, stranger still is the Cryocopter's strong, homogeneous, residual interactive neutron kinetic, or shrink, beam. This device safely and temporarily compresses molecular bonds in an object, in essence causing a reduction in physical size despite a conservation of mass. The long-term effects of exposure to this device are still unknown, and until they are well understood, the Allies are treating it as a weapon. Consequently, more and more cryocopters are beginning to appear among Allied air forces, though Allied command assures the military scientists running the field diagnostics that they are unlikely to come to harm, and would never be used in frontline engagements against the Soviets. The shrink beam was perhaps a better counter to strong units such as Soviet Apocalypse tanks, who depended on their size and firepower to crush enemy forces, both figuratively and literally. When instantly shrunk, the Apocalypse tank would go from being the most feared vehicle on the battlefield to a fast-moving rodent that could be quickly destroyed by standard Allied armor units. The same could be done against the Empire's King Oni battlewalkers.
Size does matter.
While being invulnerable to harm, Soviet units under the effect of the Iron Curtain could still be shrunk by the shrink beam. Other features of the Cryocopter were its 5 rotor blades attached to the main rotor assembly. The helicopter had a twin tail boom design, with a ducted propeller attached to the tail for faster air speeds, on par with a conventional airplane. It even had wings attached to the main body. This, plus the aforementioned ducted propeller, leads me to believe that the Cryocopter is actually a converted plane. The whole thing somewhat reminds me of the real-life McDonnell XV-1, which may have been used as inspiration for the Cryocopter's design. The Cryocopter also featured state-of-the-art diagnostic systems and heated leather seats. It even had a library and mini-lab for the scientists that operated the aircraft.
Just like in the lab.
The primary weakness of the Cryocopter was that it couldn't actually eliminate enemy units directly, and its weapons couldn't be used against hostile aircraft. It was highly durable though, able to take a lot of punishment before being brought down. Its durability would be enhanced if an Allied commander outfitted the Cryocopter with advanced aeronautics, which slightly changed the aircraft's color scheme. While Cryocopters were used throughout the war, there were a couple of notable instances involving these aircraft. The Empire of the Rising Sun's entrance into the Third World War caused both the Allies and Soviets to work together in order to beat back this new foe. The Empire managed to take over Gibraltar, claiming a key choke point that enabled them to control the Mediterranean. After the Allies' Tanya and Soviets' Natasha worked together to destroy Imperial aircraft at the Gibraltar airfield, commanders of both factions deployed bases nearby to deal with the rest of the Imperial forces. The Allied commander was supported by cryocopters that aided in freezing Imperial units and structures, the most consequential of which resulted in the liberation of captured Allied assault destroyers, which played a pivotal role in the successful recapture of Gibraltar. After the Empire had been dealt with, the Allies and Soviet Union again turned on each other. By now, the course of the war had shifted in the Allies' favor, resulting in a final battle that would take place at Leningrad, where the Union's leaders, Cherdenko and Krukov, were residing. In order to quickly move MCVs past the Soviets' outer defenses, cryocopters used their shrink beams to shrink the MCVs, enabling them to move much more quickly. Avoiding being run over, the MCVs were able to slip past the Soviet defenses and deploy, giving the Allies a foothold in the city. This operation proved that the cryocopter's shrink beam could, in some circumstances, be used on the Allies' own units to achieve positive outcomes. The Allies were victorious in the end, capturing Cherdenko and Krukov, putting both Soviet generals in an ice prison. After achieving victory against both the Empire and Soviet Union, the Allies transitioned from being a wartime power to a peacekeeping one. However, keeping the peace proved to be a more difficult affair, as uprisings within the Soviet Union and Empire sought to drive out the Allied occupation forces from their homelands. A great example of this, which also involved the use of the Allies' cryo-weapon systems, was the capture of Imperial Commander Shinzo Nagama. Located at his home in the Iga province, Nagama was training new recruits to aid in his uprising against the Allies. After eliminating Nagama's loyalist forces, cryocopters were used to freeze his house. However, Shinzo escaped just in time, entering a sudden transport disguised as a tsunami tank. Using 5 real tsunami tanks as decoys, Shinzo attempted to escape the area. Not knowing which tank was the transport, the Allied commander ordered his cryocopters to freeze all of them. Shinzo's transport was ultimately found, and he would now be put into Allied custody. With their forces stretched thin, the Allies became increasingly more reliant on FutureTech, who was more than happy to provide the Allies with the latest in cryotechnology. One initiative that began during the war, but wasn't completed until after, resulted in the creation of a peacekeeping infantryman called the Cryo Legionnaire.
The Iceman cometh!
Although the Allied nations' decision to deploy its peacekeeper divisions to the front lines of their conflicts against both the Soviet Union and the Empire of the Rising Sun raised eyebrows at the time, in retrospect, this was inarguably one of the bold, calculated risks that helped ensure the Allies' victory in the war. The peacekeepers proved resilient and disciplined as their enemies recklessly attacked, and the peacekeepers, true to their name, ensured the relative safety of civilian populations as conflict raged on. As a result, the Allies became relatively popular among war-torn nations seeking relief. In spite of all this, peacekeepers were ill-equipped to deal with the worst of what the Union and the Empire had to offer, though many of those brave men lost their lives trying anyway. So when the Allies partnered with Amsterdam-based defense contractor FutureTech Corporation to launch the Legionnaire initiative, in one sense, no one was surprised. The surprise came only once the Allies' Cryo Legionnaires were finally unveiled in all their cold, blue glory. Years before they got fitted for their custom-tailored X-1 Instinct armored suits, the men called Cryo Legionnaires undergo an extremely intense training program designed to simulate the harshest weather conditions Allied forces ever experienced fighting in the Soviet Union. Though prospective Cryo Legionnaires represent the top 1% of fittest, strongest men from across Europe and the United States, of these, only 2% of these applicants successfully complete FutureTech's classified training program. Those ultimately taken into the ranks of the Cryo Legionnaires must demonstrate not just the peak of physical fitness and dexterity, but also a specific psychological profile that FutureTech claims is optimally suited to the rigors that these men will face defending the Allies, and all the world's freedoms. And although most aspects of the Legionnaire initiative are well-protected military secrets, initial reports of the Legionnaire's stunning battlefield victories and single-digit casualty rates seem very promising indeed. Part of the appeal of the Legionnaire initiative is in the non-violent nature of its approach to conflict resolution. Cryo Legionnaires eschew any conventional weapons in favor of a semi-portable cryo-cannon, whose technology was co-opted from FutureTech's own Cryocopter design. This device quickly absorbs 99% of all heat in a fixed, conical area out in front, essentially causing everything in the vicinity to quickly freeze over. The effect is so rapid that living creatures go into a fugue state, such that their frozen bodies can be detained, collected, and later revived in time for a speedy and fair war trial. Understandably, the enemies of the Cryo Legionnaires often refuse to go quietly, and for this reason, their armored suits can withstand explosive and concussive blasts better than any personal defense systems ever developed, including, FutureTech spokespeople point out, the Soviet Union's notoriously resilient Tesla units. In addition to this, the X-1 Impulse Armor effectively heightens the wearer's reflexes, paradoxically allowing him to move much faster than an unburdened man ever could. At the same time, back-mounted air booster not only absorbs and dissipates heat, but is also used for short-range flight and various tactical maneuvers. FutureTech has firmly denied allegations surrounding a controversial incident in which a frozen Soviet combatant was shattered to pieces when struck by a Cryo Legionnaire's heel coming down from a boost jump, citing that battlefield conditions are naturally unpredictable, and that Cryo Legionnaires are already responsible for many thousands of lives saved. Whatever the case, the widely reported incident proves that all eyes are on the Legionnaire initiative, which FutureTech promises will be the future of law enforcement.
Who's ready for a cold one?
So in total, the Cryo Legionnaire's arsenal consisted of a frostbite cryocannon to freeze enemies, X-1 Instinct personal armor, Tundraless leggings, which allow the Legionnaire to walk on water, a powered air booster for temporary flight, that also acts as an effective method of permanently removing frozen enemies, and last, but not least, Berkeley Fair sunglasses to protect the eyes, and to look cool when standing around.
Let's kick some ice!
Like other Allied infantry units, whenever the Cryo Legionnaire garrisoned himself inside a multi-gunner defense turret or infantry fighting vehicle, he would replace their rocket launchers with his own cryo-weapon. The cryo-weapon of these multi-gunner systems would fire a single beam at an enemy target, just like the one the Cryocopter was equipped with. Infantry units would quickly become frozen by these cryobeams, while vehicles or naval vessels would take longer, though the time would be shortened if multiple beams were focused on a single vehicle. In the case of the IFV, their cryobeams could be used to freeze enemy structures so that other units could then instantly bring them crumbling down. Unlike the Cryo Legionnaire or Cryocopter, the cryobeams from the multi-gunner turret could be used against aircraft. Once frozen, the aircraft would plummet to the ground, being instantly destroyed. Cryo Legionnaires proved extremely valuable in helping the Allies capture Imperial Commander Kenji in Osaka. Using a capture technology inhibitor, the Allies were unable to subdue Kenji using their own high technology, and thus relied on Agent Tanya and a squad of Cryo Legionnaires to complete the job. Kenji was guarded by a platoon of Imperial troops, who were frozen by the Cryo Legionnaires. This allowed Tanya to easily gun these troops down as they made their way to the technology inhibitor. Once sighted, Tanya destroyed the inhibitor, while the Cryo Legionnaires focused on freezing Kenji inside his King Oni Battle Walker. After being frozen, the Allies used their chronosphere to teleport Kenji to a detention center elsewhere, completing his capture. Speaking of detention centers, the Allies had a major one on the island of Guam, called Detention Camp Dakota. This camp was unique in that it was primarily run by FutureTech itself, who used their cryotechnology to keep prisoners frozen on ice. This included both Imperial and Soviet prisoners of war. The most important prisoner here was the Empire's famed commando Yuriko Omega, who broke out of her frozen prison and destroyed the entire camp before making her way back to her homeland. Detention Camp Dakota wasn't the only facility run by FutureTech that was located in enemy territory. Another research facility had been set up in Murmansk, Russia. After discovering that FutureTech had been kidnapping Soviet scientists to force them to work for the company, Soviet resistance leader Dasha ordered a commander to find out what was going on at the facility in Murmansk. Upon reaching the facility, the commander's scouting force discovered cryo experiments being conducted on civilians there. This angered Dasha, who sent in a squadron of Kirovs to bomb the facility. However, thanks to the cryo weapons in the multi-gunner turrets, the Kirovs were frozen in flight and brought down. After building up an attack force at a nearby base, the Soviet commander would launch another assault against the FutureTech facility. This assault proved successful, with the entire facility being leveled, putting an end to FutureTech's cryo experiments there. Yuriko's destructive escape from Camp Dakota, along with the elimination of other research facilities at the hands of Soviet resistance forces, caused FutureTech to experience major setbacks. These setbacks would be remedied with the hiring of an experienced commander who would travel across the globe collecting weapons and technology from the Empire, Soviet Union, and Allied powers. During his ventures, the FutureTech commander had a few engagements with Allied commander Lydia Winters, who seemed to specialize in the Allies' more advanced weapon systems, including those provided to them by FutureTech. One engagement between the two commanders occurred in Greenland, on a testing ground known as the Shrink Zone. In her spare time, Lydia enjoyed attempting to improve upon the shrink technology found in the Cryocopter. Unfortunately, such action went against the end-user licensing agreement dictated that the technology must not be reverse-engineered under any circumstances. Her experiments here already created some irritating problems, and so FutureTech sent their commander to the zone to teach her a lesson on reading the fine print. Both the commander's units were all deployed in a shrunken state and would remain downsized throughout the entire battle, enabling the commanders to move their units very quickly across the zone. The FutureTech commander was able to defeat Lydia here, and as a reward, was allowed to use the Cryocopter as part of his allied arsenal. Another engagement between the two commanders occurred in Iceland. A scheduled service update in FutureTech's central cryosystems caused an allied orbital cryosatellite to become unstable. FutureTech planned to blame Lydia for this problem, which of course angered her. To make sure she complied with this arrangement, FutureTech sent their commander to destroy Lydia's base here. During the battle, the FutureTech commander went up against the full brunt of their own cryo-capable weapons, from Cryoshots to Copters to Legionnaires. Despite that, the FutureTech commander prevailed, and was again rewarded, this time able to train Cryo Legionnaires as part of his allied arsenal. While not causing direct damage, Cryoweapons proved to be the most valuable support systems in the Allied arsenal, putting their enemies on ice so that they could be safely captured or eliminated by the Allies' own forces. With the setbacks dealt to their chrono-related research initiatives, FutureTech could continue to invest more in their cryotechnology, resulting in the deployment of new cryoweapon systems in any future conflicts.